Okay, welcome everybody to the ongoing SESHA webinar Wednesday series. Today we have a special treat. We have Adam Thiel who will be joining us, or who has joined us for, as you can see, the Partnerships and Protection, the Philadelphia experience. He's taken time out of what is an incredibly busy schedule and a lot of demands on his time to talk to us a little bit today. So let me tell you what's going to happen, and then I'll turn it over to Adam. The webinar is being recorded, as with all of our webinars. So you'll be able to see that on the SESHA webpage after this. And that's just sesha.org. Let's see. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We'll pose them then to the commissioner at the end of the presentation. But you can ask questions by typing them into your questions box on your GoToWebinar control panel. And with that and another round of thanks, I'm going to turn it over to you. Oh, wait, you're on mute. Sorry.
Thank you for the kind introduction. It's truly my pleasure to join you all today. And I'm going to kind of do this, use this deck as a framing for a conversation that we can have towards the end of the time period today. So that said, if you really have a burning question, feel free to ask it at any time. But I'll just get right into this and sort of frame up the conversation we have for this afternoon. So this is just a quick about me. I've been doing this for a while in a lot of different places in a variety of different roles. And I guess I simply put this up there so you can have a sense of the lenses that I'm using to talk about the notion of partnership and practicing partnerships and the work that we have to do together as public safety folks and private industry folks to help keep our shared communities safe and protected, and of course keep our economies working. So this truly is a shared mission and a shared partnership. At least that's how I see it, and that's how we see it here in Philadelphia, formerly the workshop of the world, and we're trying to get back there again. A little bit about the two organizations that I lead. The Philadelphia Fire Department, one of the oldest fire departments in the nation. We trace our lineage back to another famous Philadelphian, Ben Franklin, in 1736, who founded the Union Fire Company. And Ben was actually because Ben was from Boston, Ben was the only person brought in from outside the city to be a Philadelphia Fire Commissioner until I arrived in 2016. And last year, we added the Office of Emergency Management to the fire department's portfolio. It essentially functions as a separate business within the fire department. Together, those two organizations, about 3,300 full-time employees in the fire department. And now we're up to about 40 or 50 full-time and 50 or 60 part-time employees in the Office of Emergency Management, because we're dealing with a lot of issues, as you all are well aware. COVID-19, we had a Hurricane Isaias hit us pretty hard here in Philadelphia, not something you typically associate with the sixth largest city in the US, and a number of other missions that we just could not have anticipated. So we've grown our workforce a little bit. Most of those folks are deployed from 63 fire stations around the city. And Philadelphia, a lot of folks think of Philadelphia as just being the center city portion, which is where all the high rises are located, kind of in the middle of that top picture. The reality is Philadelphia is a fairly large city, not as large as, say, Phoenix, the fifth largest city now, but we still cover a fair amount of land area, about 1.6 million residents. The fire department's budget is around $400 million. That's on paper. The reality is the way our budget is done, it's equivalent to about an $800 million business that we operate 24/7, 365. And you'll see some of our workload demographics here. We receive about 375,000, and it's actually probably closer to 400,000 this fiscal year. 400,000 911 calls come into the fire department. Those calls are first answered by the police department, and that's important when we talk about partnerships as well. Once the police department, which receives about 3 million 911 calls every year, Once they identify, and of course that's something we all want to happen as fast as possible, once they identify it's an incident that's better handled by the fire department, they transfer those calls to our fire communication center. The police department's 911 center is the busiest 911 center in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Our fire department communication center is the second busiest 911 center in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Most of what we do by volume is emergency medical services. We're the only emergency service 911 provider in Philadelphia. The busiest ambulance in the entire nation is not in New York, LA, or Phoenix, or Chicago, or Houston. It's actually right here in Philly for the past 2 years. We also have a very high number of structure fires, and that's part of the kind of unique built environment that we have here. We just finished Fire Prevention Week here in the US, and that week is always tied to the anniversary of the Great Chicago Fire in 1871. Chicago, as many of you know, was burned to the ground in the Great Chicago Fire. We've never had a great fire here in Philadelphia. The city was designed to be quote unquote fire safe by William Penn in 1682. We're kind of doing it one night at a time because all of the building stock that burned in Chicago, we still have it, and most of our residential buildings are actually mid 1800s row houses. They've all become connected over time. We have a lot of issues with poverty here in the city. And you can actually see the map behind me. If you see all of those red dots, every one of those red dots represents a structure fire that occurred in just the first half of calendar year 2020. So again, it's kind of a difficult thing for us. I mention this simply to say fire is not just a problem in Philadelphia. It's a major problem for us here at a different level than in a lot of other cities. But fire is still a major threat across the United States and indeed around the globe. And not just wildland fires. Of course, there's a lot of, and rightfully a lot of focus on wildland fires. The reality is we still have a lot of urban fires in the US. So far this year, tragically, we've had 22 Philadelphia residents die in fires, hundreds more injured, about 2,000 families displaced from their homes. And, you know, the beat goes on. So it's definitely something to continue to focus on. And I know I'm sort of preaching to the choir here because of your organization and your individual missions around prevention, which is another thing that's important to us, which we'll talk about a little bit too. The balance of those fire incidents, those are sort of anything you can imagine, hazardous materials incidents, technical rescue incidents, whether on a commercial site, industrial property, out in, you know, a trench rescue in the streets, whatever it is, we are the sort of emergency services provider for the city of Philadelphia, whether it's in transportation. Of course, we have a seaport, airport, railways, roadways, highways, so kind of a busy place. You can see these fires. These are just fires that I've been to, which means, unfortunately, they're all fatal fires or what we call multiple alarm fires. Fires are generally speaking, and one of the other takeaways I want to make sure you get out of this, it's hard to generalize about anything in the fire and emergency services. Again, I've worked in 5 states, taught and done consulting and all the rest, and around the globe. And if you've seen one fire department, you've seen precisely one fire department because they all operate a little bit differently. In fact, across 80% of the US land area, the primary response force for fire and EMS are volunteers. We don't have any volunteers here in Philadelphia. It's just simply too busy. And you can see that with these activity levels here. So these are all, pretty challenging fires. And you can see as well, just to kind of calibrate this globally, we have more fires and raw numbers than many other cities around the world. And when you control that for population, we have more structure fires than pretty much any city in the world. Recognizing that it can be difficult sometimes to compare, you end up with a little bit of an apples to oranges comparison. But it's all to say we have a lot of experience here. Our firefighters and medics are incredibly dedicated. And the other thing I want you to get out of this is a lot of that experience is around a set of building types that we see a lot. This is actually a restaurant that burned in an old city, Philadelphia, where many of you might have visited, never reopened. Row house fires, industrial fires of certain types. A fire in one of your facilities, even for us, as much firefighting as we do, that would be a novel event. And that's one of the things I think we really want to talk about how to make sure that if that ever happens, and we hope that, of course, never happens, we all work on prevention first and foremost, we want to make sure that goes well. This is a what we call a 5-alarm fire, and let me finish that thought from earlier. Fires in cities, at least, are generally calibrated by what we call the number of alarms, and 1-alarm fire is sort of your still fire coming out of 1 or 2 windows in a residential building. 2-alarm fire is more severe, 3 alarms, 4 alarms, 5 alarms, and so on and so forth. 1-alarm fire in most urban jurisdictions in the country will bring you about 12 different pieces of fire apparatus, 4 engines, 2 ladder trucks, an ambulance, a couple of battalion chiefs or command officers. So roughly 25 or so firefighters and 12 pieces of apparatus. So you can imagine a 5-alarm fire is about 5 times that. This is actually an old mill building that was owned by a development company. They were going to redevelop it, and we don't know if this was an arson fire. We still have an arson problem here in Philadelphia. About 800 arson cases a year are investigated by our fire marshals and the police department and the Federal Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms working together. So we don't know the cause of this, but this fire was big enough, and you can actually see if you look in the very back corner of the picture, kind of where that one-way arrow that's on the gray building is pointing. This is right when that top floor is getting ready to collapse into the street. This fire, now located in a dense and old neighborhood, dense urban area surrounded by row houses on all sides. This fire was intense enough it created its own weather, and we actually had spot fires. You can see some of those flaming embers. They were radiating out from this fire, and we had firefighters, downstream, putting out fires on the roofs of row houses, et cetera. And I mention this simply because even if your facility is entirely protected, very safe, you can still have issues with adjacent fires, whether it's wildland urban interface, or in our case, whether it's urban properties that might burn. So there's always this notion of thinking about the entire system and where your facility is located and how your operations sit in the middle of supply chains, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the other things we've dealt with, and this is just 2020. A few of these pictures here, the ones that have water or water, as we call it in Philadelphia, the water pictures are all from Hurricane Isaias. The top picture there are a couple of barges that broke loose in the Schuylkill River and crashed into a bridge. I show this to talk about the partnerships that we have when we deal with not just daily disasters, but when we have larger scale incidents. That is an Army Corps of Engineers project. The barge is owned by a private contractor, contracted to the Army Corps of Engineers. It's a state bridge, and obviously it creates a local problem. There's a saying in our business, all disasters are local. So we in the Office of Emergency Management were kind of in the seat for bringing all of those partners together and figuring out how we could get this bridge inspected, assured safe, move the barges off it, and continue, get traffic moving back across it, because the impact that traffic closures have on supply chains and interstate commerce. Below there are 2 photos from 2 different neighborhoods in Philadelphia, 2 different corners of the city. In both instances, we had to evacuate around 100 residents from buildings. In one case, a neighborhood that's had recurrent flooding problems for many years and has a lot of environmental and social justice issues, legacy issues. And in one instance, from a relatively new apartment building that was built in a floodplain. So our firefighters, assisted by police officers, our medics, work to rescue people from those areas. And of course, the other thing that we always work on during steady state operations, while this presentation is focused a lot on response, because we've been focused on response this year, normally emergency management agencies and fire departments too, for that matter, spend a lot of time working on mitigating and preventing and planning for incidents in the first place. And you can see in that top picture, that's one of the many meetings that we've had since March around COVID-19. Our Office of Emergency Management, Fire Department, we've been doing a lot of things during COVID-19, things that even in my career, I just never expected to be doing. We've been producing masks. We've been producing cloth masks. That first call came to me. So we started producing cloth masks. We've been housing folks who needed isolation or quarantine in hotels. We've actually had fire captains managing hotels for quarantine populations. We've been feeding kids, getting internet out into homes that don't have them. We have a lot of concentrated poverty here in Philadelphia. We've, of course, been supporting our health department with a host of different missions, setting up alternate care sites, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I say that all of those missions, we are sort of the facilitators, the communicators, the collaborators, and all of those missions depend on a whole series of partners and partnerships to make those things happen. And despite the challenges of COVID, not necessarily being able to do that coordination and collaboration the way that we typically do, we've been able to get it done and accomplish a whole range of things under conditions that, frankly, none of us ever expected. Some more pictures of Philadelphia. Of course, a port city, as I mentioned, a lot of different transportation routes. The port of Philadelphia is actually one of the few East Coast ports where traffic has grown during the COVID-19 pandemic. And we, of course, have seen no diminution of rail traffic, highway traffic. Industry and commerce continue to move along. Production continues to move along, even if maybe at slightly different rates. But in these photos, you can see rail yards. In the background, you can see the refinery that we'll talk about later. That was formerly the largest refinery on the East Coast of the US and one of the oldest refineries. Shipyard there in the foreground, the historic Philadelphia Navy Yard that still has federal equities there, still a Navy presence there aboard that site, although a lot of it has been redeveloped. So the other reason I mention this is you can see the mix of uses. We have, heavy industry. We have a refinery that, for a host of reasons over the years, the fact that that refinery, when it began in the late 1800s, when it started refining actually whale oil, the residential growth had not come right up to the fence line. In this case, the residential growth came right to the fence line, and we almost had a really bad day back in June of 2019 that I'll mention later. And again, you can see Center City there. Center City is still growing. Philadelphia is a wonderful city, and we hope that you all come visit and bring your business here when we get out of the COVID-19 pandemic. We have about 30 high-rise buildings under construction in Center City despite COVID. Comcast, NBC Universal's headquarters is here. They just built a new R&D tower, and they're getting ready to build another one. So this is a great place to locate your business and manufacturing facilities. Just wanted to throw that out there as well. One of our fireboats, of course, Philadelphia sits at the confluence of the Delaware and the Schuylkill rivers. Schuylkill, by the way, in Dutch means hidden river. This is one of our newer fireboats. Again, some more fire photographs to illustrate some of the points. The photo you see there with the fire coming out the window of that building, that's a building that was built in the late 1800s. At the time, it would have been a high rise. It's an historic iron front building. And that building over the years had been renovated. It had a bunch of small businesses in it, sort of an incubator, some residential development in there. It had never had sprinklers added, and as far as we could tell, had no real fire protection system besides the minimum that was required by the code years ago. Keep in mind, most fire and building codes are not retroactive, so they're only contemporary around the time the building was built. As a result, this was a 4-alarm fire right in our historic Old City district. That fire affected a number of adjacent properties. We basically had to shut that street down for about 6 months while that property was demolished. Actually, that property and the immediately adjacent property had to be torn down to assure the structural safety of the neighborhood. And a number of the businesses that were affected by that never reopened. So again, this just illustrates, well, that fire stopped. You can see that green light. That fire stopped at that building because that building had sprinklers. So when it broke through, the fire sprinklers activated and helped us put that fire out. We had to displace a lot of people out of these buildings as well. Huge impact on commerce and on their business. On the top there, you can see that kind of ugly gray smoke. That is right adjacent to the Northeast Corridor. So we had to stop Amtrak traffic for several hours during this fire. This is a recycling facility. All kinds of different materials in there. That smoke was acrid. Very challenging incident. This was a 4-alarm fire and had downwind and downstream impacts for days after this fire. And of course, we protect the Philadelphia International Airport. Pretty much every airport in the US is protected by some unit of local government. In our case, it's the Philadelphia Fire Department. And I think a reason that matters to you all in particular, lot of air freight in and out of this facility. Actually, you might have seen years ago there was a lithium-ion battery fire on a cargo aircraft. Well, there have been a couple of those, but one of the first ones was actually here in Philly. So to the extent that supply chains, particularly specialized and high-tech supply chains, rely on air transport, it's pretty important to understand who's protecting those assets at every stage of their journey, because we know we get a lot of different, precursor products and electronic components, high-tech stuff, in through our cargo city here at PHL. And of course, the passengers. We protect the passengers as well. This is one of our liquid terminals in the city. So, millions of gallons of flammable products of all types, hydrocarbon-based products here. And this was a fire you can see in the valve assembly adjacent to one of these tanks. Now, this facility it's owned by a company that does have a physical presence in Philadelphia. Frankly, by the time they arrived, we were already there and deployed, and hadn't completely mitigated the incident. We did do something that typically you wouldn't do. You can see how close the fire is to that tank. We didn't feel like, even with the fixed fire protection systems there on the site, and we did this in consultation with the first representative of that company showed up, and we essentially had to work with that individual and take action before any of their other response assets arrived. Sort of a testament to partnership, the fact that we were able to bring this incident to a safe conclusion without anybody get hurt. Shortly after that picture in the bottom left corner, or it could be the right corner on your screen, but the bottom corner where you see the firefighters in silhouette, we actually sent firefighters in to push that flammable product away from the valving system so we could shut off those valves and then end the incident. That not necessarily a textbook operation, something we had to work out. A lot of different folks involved in this. You can see our hazardous materials team, and you can see the other picture I want to draw your attention to is the command post there. This was a 3-alarm incident. So you can see all the different units there on that board, and pretty much anywhere that you have a response, there's going to be some type of a command post to identify. And it's pretty important as you're thinking about your response plans that you know how to identify that, who's going to be there, and make sure you have somebody assigned to that command post, some representative from your facility, from the company, as well as whatever other subject matter experts you need to have there, because that's really where the decisions are made. This was a 4-alarm fire in another repurposed building. Again, I draw attention to this. This was a big former mill complex built in the late 1800s. It had been renovated over the years. No fire protection systems added. It had been renovated over the years, split up into multiple occupancies, all of them unrelated businesses. The fire started in one of them. It was an arson fire, and the fire, of course, destroyed all of those businesses, regardless of whatever they were doing in their particular space. So again, it kind of illustrates the need to think about things as a system, and think about adjacent properties and external hazards when you're planning for safe operations. The top 2 pictures there also from the flooding that we had from Hurricane Isaias, and the bottom 2 pictures are actually during the first week in June. And I should say, here in Philadelphia, obviously part of our history as the birthplace of the United States, we absolutely appreciate and applaud the safe and free expression of anybody's First Amendment rights. We are very aware of and very happy to and do every day protect and help peaceful protests, help that activity complete safely. What we had during the first week of June, a lot of very righteous, peaceful protest activity that spun off into something else, as you saw, not just in Philadelphia, but around the U.S. And that civil unrest, which I, again, draw a distinction between that and peaceful protesting, that caused us to have to do some things that, were different. We had about 60 structure fires in 60 hours during that period of time. And again, we're a busy fire department, so typically we do 7 to 8 working structure fires, severe structure fires, 1-alarm jobs in a 24-hour period. We did essentially we were doing one an hour during this. Many of them are still being investigated. Had a lot of other stuff going on. And in the Office of Emergency Management, we help coordinate a lot of different activities, all of these external partners. We ended up during the peak of that couple weeks in June, we ended up having about 3,300 National Guard soldiers here in Philadelphia. We had aircraft and other types of assets from a host of different federal, state, and other local agencies. And it was a difficult time for all of us. We're glad that we were able to, we're not aware that during that period of time anybody lost their life. And for us, while certainly we're all still thinking about what happened during that period of time, and we're continuing to do everything we can to help folks express peacefully and safely express their First Amendment rights now. That was an incredible operation. You can see we blocked off the street in front of our building and used these office trailers that we had purchased for COVID quarantine. Once they were cleaned, of course, we put those out in the street because we really needed to expand our emergency operations center. Another point I would make is that we've experimented with a lot of different models since COVID, and there have been times in my career over the years where we tried doing a virtual emergency operations center, and the COVID experience has sort of borne out to me that certainly there are hybrid and networked models to really make critical decisions, life and death decisions on a moment's notice when you don't know when that moment's going to be. You have to have folks in the same room, or at least immediately connected to the point where there's a screen sitting there and there's somebody on the other end 24/7, 365. You can walk in front of the screen and wave. So as you think about, and I know a lot of you, global concerns, global footprints, it's impossible to bring everybody together. But thinking about how you can create as close to an environment as possible during an unforeseen event is really vital. So all of those trailers, we basically had hardwired connections into our emergency operations center. So we had immediate access to the different clusters of folks, the different planning cells who were working in those trailers, different agencies. So we did our best, and frankly, this has worked for us. We've only had, while COVID has hit the fire department pretty hard, it has not hit us to the point where we've had to reduce service. Tragically, we did lose one of our firefighters to COVID after on-the-job exposures. We've not had any confirmed cases, knock on wood, in our emergency operations center, despite working, essentially being in continuous activation since early March for COVID and the civil unrest. And then, of course, we had Hurricane Isaias, et cetera, et cetera. Again, just some more about partnerships there. This is actually a naval ship. Essentially, it's a MARAD ship, Marine Administrative Division, doing some training with them. And I put this in here: specialized environment, specialized training, low frequency, high risk events. There was just a fire on a car carrier in Jacksonville. We get a lot of car carriers in here, imported cars from all over the world. Number of firefighters injured on that incident, and of course, that vessel taken out of service and its cargo as well. I'm sure many of you saw the firefight on the Bonhomme Richard naval ship in San Diego and how challenging that was. This is our firefighters doing training with specialists from the maritime firefighting community on how to fight a fire in that ship and in ships in general, because again, it's a very different operating environment, not different from the types of environments that you all manage. And it's vital that whoever you're counting on to safely and effectively make that response with a minimum of damage, that they have some insight to the operating environment beforehand. Contrary to popular opinion, and I think folks get this idea from the television shows, we have literally thousands, hundreds of thousands of buildings in the city of Philadelphia. We do not have plans for a very small fraction of those buildings. Do we have building plans or pre-incident plans or binders full of material safety data sheets? That's just not the reality. We do have a 24/7, 365 watch center. It's not like you see on television. The show 24 is one that comes to mind, where they can launch a drone or they have immediate access to a database and know who's where. We don't have any of that information. There are no fire departments that do, or emergency management agencies. All of you file tier 2 reports. We have those somewhere around here. Historically, those were filed in binders. We do have a database, and we can reach back to our what we call our RIC, our Regional Integration Center, frequently, and you all know this better than anybody. That data is not necessarily completely up to date with what's on premises in terms of the quantities or the particular materials at any point in time. So it's a real challenge for us to be using outdated information, outdated data, and anything that you all can do to make sure. This is why we focus so much on having somebody at the command post working together to be able to get the absolute latest information possible on specific quantities of materials, where they're located, particular hazards. And frankly, while we have a hazardous materials team, and you see them here, very well trained, a great group of folks, they're not chemists, and they're certainly not, they're not chemies. And there are so many chemical compounds out there, it would be impossible for us to have a catalog or be able to understand exactly how all of those materials behave when they are mixed together or in transportation, come out of containment, or when they're in a process of a particular kind. So again, these partnerships are vital to be able to make things safe and successful during a response. So this is the former Philadelphia Energy Solutions refinery that I mentioned earlier. Believe it or not, this was only a 3-alarm fire. For us, that's kind of in the middle. I'll show you a 6-alarm fire later. One of the reasons this was quote unquote only a 3-alarm fire is because that facility, a very large facility, had an on-site fire brigade and a full-time fire and emergency services group. A relatively small number of people, very well trained, and very obviously deep understanding of exactly what was going on in this very complicated unit. This was by all accounts, and this incident is still under investigation, as you might imagine. This was in June of 2019. From what we understand so far, obviously, this was not supposed to happen. And this was, when you look at probabilities, this was a less than 1% probability event. Yet it happened. And it happened like so many industrial accidents and complex systems. It happened because of the failure of a part that probably a very small part, and this is all public, a very small part, basically a pipe elbow that had been inspected for years, and it failed at the wrong time. Now, the good news story about this is the plant operators were very well trained. The product here, obviously a lot of hydrocarbon products, you all will be familiar with HF, hydrofluoric acid, or hydrogen fluoride, was used in this refining process. So really what exploded essentially was a BLEVE, a boiling liquid expanding vapor explosion. There was a BLEVE of a hydrocarbon tank underneath a vessel where the HF was stored. Thankfully, this facility had invested in a redundant system, and they had very well-trained operators who were awake and alert, and at literally 3 o'clock in the morning were able to recognize what was happening and what was likely to happen, and were able to evacuate the HF into that secondary containment system. Were it not for that, we would have had, an industrial disaster, an epic industrial disaster on our hands. As it was, only trace amounts of HF escaped. We got the fire out fairly quickly. The incident, however, continued for 3 months and 3 days until we put that incident under control. Obviously, every federal agency you can possibly imagine, a lot of the ones that you all work with, the Department of Labor, DEP, our state Department of Environmental Protection, ATF, our fire marshals, OSHA, EPA, on and on and on, the Chemical Safety and Hazard Investigation Board, all of these different agencies brought in, and ultimately this company went into bankruptcy. The facility was sold to a firm that's going to redevelop it into a 21st century logistics hub. They're going to keep the terminal operations, but they've told us they're not going to be refining anymore. So this event had it, and this is a company that really did put a lot of effort into planning and prevention and maintenance. A lot of staff there, a lot of skilled trades, and not the worst case scenario, but still a very low frequency but very high consequence event happened. And we're fortunate that because of our partnerships, and we trained constantly with this fire brigade. We went to incidents there, monthly meetings. So a lot of things that we did up front, so folks weren't exchanging business cards when this incident happened. And that's one of the reasons it was kept at a 3-alarm fire and didn't end up consuming much more of that facility and potentially exposing our communities and neighborhoods to a much greater threat. Just some of the aftermath of this, as you can imagine, normal operations at this facility ended on that day. And it started the kind of mothballing process. Just some of the things, as you can imagine, there a lot of media interest, and we worked very hard to work with the owners of the facility and all the different agencies that were involved, and that made for an interesting back and forth a lot of days. We had invited the facility, the ownership, to come and stand with us as we did press conferences very frequently. There was a lot of community angst, a lot of neighborhood discussion that became very heated. A commission was impaneled. We did a report. You can actually find this on our website. And while the company actually absolutely did right by us in terms of information, they were very forthcoming. That complicated facility, and I use that word deliberately, complicated set of processes and piping and vessels and different precursors and finished products. When you blow something like that up, it becomes complex. And I use that word deliberately in that at the point we arrived, and for 3 months later, nobody really understood exactly what had happened, what type of damage, what was going to fail next, because simply you create that kind of explosion, there's no way of knowing. We actually brought in it's a group of 7 federal agencies, including the Department of Defense, to do some modeling on this, and this absolutely just this exceeded the limits of our collective technical capacity to model and understand what was going to happen. So we had to err on the side of caution, which caused a lot of business impacts and a great partnership. But that firm decided that they were going to let us handle the media, essentially, which almost was a full-time job. And I think it's important for all of us to be able to soothe, as you can imagine, the folks in the neighborhood. One of my deputy commissioners lives not far from this facility and came out that morning after hearing the boom. He was woken up to find particles of essentially aluminum shielding that had been blown off the different stacks and landed on his car. So there was a lot of community angst around this, but a pretty good partnership on balance, and we're hoping to work with the new firm to build that out in a different way. This is a 6-alarm fire. This is the largest fire that we've had since I came to Philadelphia in 2016. Complex of 5 buildings, all of which have different fire protection systems, all of which have different ownership, all of which are storing different types of materials. We were able to save 2 of the 5 buildings that were involved, as well as the neighborhood across the railroad tracks. The lesson here, again, we had building representatives coming from all these different owners and operators. You had landlords versus tenants. And as we were making decisions about what we could reasonably save and protect versus what we couldn't, it was pretty important to have those partnerships on the ground. This truly was at 3 o'clock on a Saturday morning to be able to have all those folks involved. This fire, 6-alarm fire, brought about half of the on-duty staff of the Philadelphia Fire Department. So around 350 or 400 firefighters, medics, a lot of different partners from other city agencies, the police department, our building department, Red Cross, Salvation Army, all of our utility companies. That's what it takes on any of these incidents. That's the number of partners and partnerships that we're managing on any significant incident. And this incident also, this fire burned for several days while the products just kept flaring up. And a lot of damage to a lot of economic damage here. And this also brought about 350, 400 firefighters and medics, about 50 different, what you would colloquially call fire trucks. We of course have specialized names for them, in a we're a very well-resourced fire department. We're the fourth largest fire department in the country, depending on how you count, fourth or fifth. Around 3,300, well, 3,200 uniformed positions, uniformed firefighters and medics for most communities in the United States, including some fairly good-sized cities. This would have been an overwhelming incident that would have required what we call mutual aid from other jurisdictions, potentially other states. This incident was completely handled by the city of Philadelphia with some of those other partners I mentioned. So completely managed locally, but this is an incident that would have outstripped the resources in many other places where I've worked or done other things. And finally, I want to close again, Philadelphia, wonderful city. This is the Super Bowl parade. We're hoping to get back to this. And one of the reasons I put this up here, this brought about a million extra people in over a couple of days for this celebration. And for many years, we have worked in Office of Emergency Management and all of our different partners on special events. And we have always used those as opportunities to practice. As a famous Philadelphian, Allen Iverson said, it's about practice. So for many years, we've been practicing our collaboration and our partnerships and developing relationships on special events. Over the past, since the refinery explosion, but certainly in 2020, those relationships and those partnerships have really been tested. And I'm happy to say, even with Hurricane Isaias, we had to evacuate about 200 people, as I mentioned, rescue them from that neighborhood. The Red Cross housed about 300 people in a hotel. As you can imagine, sheltering is a little bit different now. But that practice is important, not having assumptions about who's going to do what, really trying to take a systems perspective and understand supply chains, utilities, knowing who's coming on, on that bad day, no matter how low probability it is, practicing that, making sure that you have as much specialized knowledge and expertise available, and really giving your local response agencies insight. And of course, the other thing, which Ben Franklin said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I know you all are the experts in prevention, which is one reason I've kind of focused this on response and recovery. And I think it's nice to talk to a group where you can take prevention as a given. It still is the best way to manage these events, as we're fond of saying, the best fire is the one that never starts. That said, you can do a really great job at prevention, and those 1% events do happen. The novel events happen. We're not supposed to have hurricanes or tornadoes here in Philadelphia. We've had both this year, on top of a pandemic, on top of civil unrest, et cetera, et cetera. And really, I think making sure that you understand who's on the other end of that 911 line, and making, as I'm fond of saying, planning, not plans. And that's not my quote. That's Eisenhower, Dwight D. Eisenhower. In my entire career, I've never seen a plan. I've never seen a plan that was written down, no matter how much work was put into it, unfold the way it was contemplated. What we've done throughout this series of events is developed a very robust planning capacity. So we essentially have people planning all the time, 24/7, 365, and thinking about different scenarios, thinking about what might be next. And frankly, our imaginations have been challenged. I thought I was a pretty imaginative guy, but thinking about how all of this stuff has stacked up over this year, and we're already thinking about what's next, and certainly encourage everybody to wear your masks. And I think that is it. I'm happy to take any questions, or that's my Twitter there. And again, feel free to email me anytime if you want to continue the conversation.
That was fantastic. Thank you very much. We do have a few questions. I'm going to invite people to type in any additional questions they have into your GoToWebinar control panel, into the questions box. I'm going to do two quick SESHA items. One is a board member pointed out that this is our 2-year anniversary of doing webinars, so cool. And we will have one on 10/28 on selected COVID topics at 4 p.m., so keep an eye out for that. With that, let me jump over to some of the questions. So the first one is from Ron Schultz, and it says, how is your incident command setup at the incident scene different in light of COVID? Do you have social distancing issues for firefighters? And he had a follow-up on that one that was a question about, has there been an increase in COVID cases for firefighters compared to the general population?
Great questions. We actually have not changed much in terms of the way we do an incident command post. You saw the pictures. We've tried to expand our EOC. We've had people telecommuting into our EOC. We put trailers in the street. We have 3 or 4 satellite facilities now where we have people working, and they're kind of networked in to our main EOC. When things really kind of pop off on short notice, we have to bring people in and co-locate them, and that's just kind of a risk-benefit decision when you're talking about an environment where you're handling these multiple fires and you have people running down onto active interstate highways. You got to bring people together. What we have done and been fairly good about is masking. We were an early adopter with the cloth masks, and I really think that's been helpful to us. We have had an impact in our workforce. Like I said, we lost a firefighter to COVID, so it is real, it's serious. We've been able to, simply because of our scale, we've been able to absorb that impact without any diminution of service. That is not true in a lot of other fire departments and emergency services organizations around the country. So it's important to know kind of what the impact is on whoever you're expecting to call on that unfortunate and very low probability day that you have to call 911 for help.
Excellent. The next one's from Vinny DiGiorgio. It says, I'm sure you're aware of the increased use and hazards associated with lithium-ion battery usage. Can you tell us about your pre-incident plan associated with the lithium-ion battery fires?
Yeah, lithium-ion batteries, and I should say, and full disclosure, I'm on the UL Fire Council as well as the UL Firefighter Safety Research Institute. And fortunately, UL's been doing a lot of work on this. We in the response world are still a little bit behind the curve on lithium-ion batteries. That technology has been moving forward so fast, and the deployment of the technology, and of course, all the chemistries are different. So it's a very, and I will again use the word, it's a very complex topic, because even when these things are tested and you have chemies and scientists working on them, there are some unanswered questions about how the different chemistries behave after certain types of damage or when you lose the physical separation between cells. So it's really challenging for us. There was a fire in Surprise, Arizona that injured a number of firefighters in a utility scale battery energy storage system, and UL did a report on that. But it's kind of a scary thing for us, and it's definitely something. If you are, I think it's safe to say it's buyer beware. So if you are using, if you're using any lithium-ion batteries at scale, and it doesn't take a lot, I mean, a little goes a long way, you really got to understand and make sure you get the specialized expertise to do that safely. It probably does not exist in your local fire department or on the hazardous materials response team. The infrastructure to do that safely is really still being built.
Yeah. So we have one more comment and one more question, and then unless other folks type in. So this comment is from Hannah Rosen. It says, wow, I am incredibly impressed by the type of incidents that you've handled. I love Philly, and thanks for keeping it safe. And then the remaining question is, what is your prediction for the Eagles this season, Super Bowl or not?
Well, you can see I'm fly Eagles fly. And until last week we were still in first place.
Yeah,
it's interesting. I'm hopeful. I'm always hopeful. It's tough to be an optimist in my business or our business because again, we're all trained to think about and help mitigate the worst case scenarios. It does raise a great point. The Eagles for us are a great partner. We always have a footprint down there, fire department footprint, our hazmat team at all the home games. So we've been working with the Eagles organization to try to bring our home team back and bring fans back. We're going to be trying that on this Sunday for the first time. But it's not just well, let's give it a shot. We did a tabletop exercise before the season with the Eagles and a number of different partners and stakeholders. We'll be doing another tabletop as we bring fans back. And we have a constant dialogue and a really great relationship with the organization. and all the different partners that they bring in. And the same thing for the Army-Navy game. We're not sure what's going to happen with that. Of course, we had it the past couple years. It's going to be in New York next year. Then we have it again. Talk about partnerships. We bring in all kinds of partnerships, having all the Joint Chiefs here, having the president here, and a lot of other folks. That's a major special event for us as well. And we really rely on the relationships that we have with all of the different federal, state, and local agencies that are our partners, as well as private businesses. I mean, the Eagles are it's a private business. It's a big business. We work with the NFL. We have first name relationships with the NFL, safety and security staff, and that really is kind of the secret to our success. And I'm hoping that will be the secret to an Eagles season where we turn the corner and end up winning, because that's frankly what they did as a team that Super Bowl season. There's a real metaphor for that. A lot of bad things happened. It was very challenging. They had to essentially pivot and change their entire plan and rebuild around some new key players, and they made it happen. So that's been a great example for us, and we're hoping it happens for the Eagles, and we're hoping that it continues to work for us as we deal with whatever comes next. I guess murder hornets. We don't have to worry about murder hornets now because it's going to be winter, but we are seeing, an uptick in COVID-19. So that is still, I know you have that webinar coming up, still a very serious topic for us, and we're still doing a lot of work around that daily in concert with a lot of different public and private sector partners.
For sure. And I wish you good luck with being able to safely open the stadiums and things like that. That's fantastic. As a person who grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, I can't necessarily wish you good luck on the record for the team because, we're big rivals, but I hope that the franchise and the city do well with it.
Well, I spent most of my career in the National Capital Region, so I certainly, know some folks with the Washington football team, and hopefully everybody. I mean, this is a tough time. I worry about players and fans and everything else. Hopefully, we can all figure this out as a nation and as different industries.
For sure. And I just from SESHA, I want to thank you again for being willing to do this and doing such a great job. We really appreciate it, and thank you for bringing your expertise and your experiences to us so we could learn a little bit more.
Team effort. Thank you all, and be safe. Thanks for what you do.
Thank you again. Bye-bye.